When I was first asked to come and speak today, it was kind of interesting because most of the speaking that I have done over the last 7 years has largely been in relation to the Second Amendment. I've spent the last 7 years working with a group called the Firearms Policy Coalition as their chief spokesman, as a host of a program they have called A Morning Coffee with Craig. I'm the Craig in the Morning Coffee. Some of you will get that on the way home. That's okay. I also work with a group called Florida Carry, which is a Second Amendment civil rights advocacy group in the state of Florida. I do communications for them as well as host a program for them. Also, finally, I have a news website, 2anews.us, that we're working to get off the ground, to actually share and talk specifically just about 2A News from grassroots advocates across the country. So I share all of that with you, to share with you to understand that I've literally been involved in this. I'm probably not as long as some, but being involved in this in California is like, dog years. It really is. But one of the things that I started to see, in particular as we started to get into COVID-19, was there was very much a similarity. And we at FPC all 100% believe that it's not about necessarily the gun. The fight for the Second Amendment is not about the right to own a gun. It's about our civil rights. And it's about a fundamental understanding that if we are going to allow our government to violate and to ignore one of our fundamental constitutional rights, then none of our fundamental constitutional rights are safe. In particular, the Second Amendment, because it exists to protect all others. As Dave Chappelle said, the First Amendment is first for a reason. The second, in case the first doesn't work out. I never thought I'd be quoting Chappelle at a Republican meeting. But hey, even a clock is right twice a day. A broken clock. So what I wanted to do was, and I wanted to draw kind of a correlation between the fight for our right to keep and bear arms and the fight that we've had to engage in more recently relating to COVID-19, the lockdown, and once again, our other fundamental rights. Because the tactics that they're using are not new. They're the same. Okay, I'll give you an example. The first thing that they do is they declare a crisis or an emergency, right? With firearms, well, it's a crisis. It's a gun epidemic, right? They want to say there's a gun violence epidemic. They go as far as to get experts to declare it to be an epidemic. Now, mind you, they don't go get experts in firearms to declare it to be an epidemic. They don't go get social scientists, people who study people, or economists to determine it's an epidemic. They go and they get medical doctors because they know a lot about guns. Yeah. That was funnier in my head, I guess. But the fact is that they don't. In fact, the number of doctors that are engaged in the fight against the right to keep and bear arms that are actually like emergency room doctors. Now, mind you, these are people who see the worst of the worst relating to guns. Right? I'm not getting into legal or illegal. I'm not even getting into ideology. I'm saying they're the ones, the emergency room doctors are the ones who see people who come into the emergency room who've been shot. And so needless to say, many of them do not have a very positive opinion of the right to keep and bear arms. And so the first thing that they do is they want to say, well, we have a gun violence epidemic. We have got to restrict the use of guns. Right? So let's move forward. Let's look at COVID-19. Now, the interesting thing is that as soon as they declared it to be an epidemic, right, as soon as they declared that it was going to be a disaster, they said there's going to be over 2 million potential deaths in the United States as a result of COVID-19. Now, we all know that we're a little behind, on those numbers. Right? We all know that we're not even close to those numbers. But see, what it required them to do was, in order to get people to pay attention, in order to get the politicians to pay attention, they had to overinflate the numbers. They had to give an outrageous number such that politicians would say, wait a minute, we need to completely, utterly change policy. Right? Facts no longer matter. The experts have said we have an epidemic and we've got to stop it. Now that leads us into, by the way, number two. Number two, the thing that happens is the suspension of all facts. Facts now no longer matter. We cannot bring up information. We cannot bring up evidence. We cannot point out, even in instances where you know that the elected official knows absolutely nothing about what they're talking about, the very fact that they are concerned and that they want to help and that they want to stop this epidemic is all they need. Now, there was a measure that would have banned, at one point in the California legislature, there was a measure that would have banned items that are, they called them precursor parts, right? These are parts that would be or could potentially be a firearm. And the way in which they defined these parts was if it could be readily turned into a firearm. Right? Readily converted, that was the phrase. Readily converted into a firearm. So, in the committee room, as we got up, and the DOJ was there, and they brought all of their display firearms and their 80% lowers and all of that. And so I basically went up and I said, okay, well, the first fundamental problem with this bill is the idea of the term readily convertible, because that's what the bill says. And then I pulled out a block of aluminum and I set it on the desk. This is a 0% lower. I said the only difference between this and that 80% lower that you have on the table over there is a CNC machine and the ability to know how to use it. Therefore, by definition, it is readily convertible. So I would ask the assemblyman, where would you like me on the block of aluminum to put the serial number? I then pulled out an AK flat. And I put it on the desk. I said, "This is an AK flat." Now, you might notice that it looks like a regular sheet of aluminum. Now, other than some divots and some holes in specific places, it looks like any piece of aluminum or metal, sheet metal that you could pick up at Lowe's or Ace Hardware. I would like to ask the assemblyman, where at Lowe's and Ace Hardware would you like to put the DOJ agent to do background checks and provide serial numbers for every piece of sheet metal that you're going to issue? And then finally, I went ahead and I displayed and I shared with everyone a blog post. And I had already shared it with all of their staff. It was a blog post that showed the step-by-step process that an individual used in order to convert a shovel into a fully functional AK-47 using basic tools. I mean, he had a forge and everything. It was quite impressive, let me tell you. But once again, by definition, it was readily convertible. So, Mr. Assemblyman, where on the shovel would you like me to put the serial number? I mean, the bill was so bad that their own lawyer said that the bill was likely to be thrown out as void. The language was void for vagueness. Now, in a Democratic-controlled legislature, when your lawyer tells you that your language is bad, it's probably pretty bad. But I share all of that with you to tell you that they have now, and by the way, just as a side note, 2 days before this hearing, I went in and I met with the member's chief of staff and the staffer who was carrying this bill, and I walked them through the entire presentation. And I told them, this is what I'm going to say in committee. I really think you need to pull your bill. They didn't. He was wholly embarrassed. His only response was, "But they're killing children." As a result, Assemblyman Bill Quirk, any of you here familiar with Bill Quirk?
Perfect name.
Yeah, well, he's one of the most anti-gun members of the California legislature. Even he was like, look, I don't know what just happened, but somebody made a rifle out of a shovel. We're going to have to hold this bill in committee. So they held it that week, and then 2 weeks later, they wound up passing it out. And that goes exactly to the point that I want to make. To them, facts don't matter. Nothing changed about the bill. The bill was no less nonsensical, yet they passed it anyway. Because, well, hey, there's an epidemic. Fast forward to COVID. Once again, now, I sit on a school board in Sacramento, and one of the interesting things was when all of the superintendents got together and they said, okay, well, we really need to close our schools. They're getting all this information, we need to close our schools. And I'm like, okay, but yeah, but we need to close it for like 3 to 5 weeks. And I'm like, but the CDC says that a school closure of anything less than 8 weeks does absolutely no good. It does absolutely no good to reduce the flow of the virus. So why are we closing for 3 to 5 weeks? No one had an answer. Ask the county health department, why are we closing our schools? No one had an answer. Why? Because it was political. Because the decision that was made by superintendents, was made by, in that case, non-elected officials, in some cases, if their board members voted elected officials, simply because there's a crisis, and therefore we've got to do something. By the way, whenever a politician tells you that we've got to do something, don't do anything. Run. Okay, I like that one, run. But they're going to say we've got to do something, but we've got to do something. I mean, look, there's danger. And this is the answer I always give when they say we've got to do something. I always say that it's like saying, okay, my car won't start, so maybe I'll rotate the tires. Right? I'll rotate the tires because I got to do something, right? But once again, so there is a suspension of logic, right? And coupled with that suspension of logic, the mainstream media or the media, which by the way, I will just tell you, I put a lot on the mainstream media in terms of their media bias. I believe they know enough about politics to be actually biased. Local media, I'll just say that in particular, television media, they really don't know much. I cannot even begin to tell you how many times I've gotten stories have been wrong. I mean, I could do a whole website just on Sacramento news of every story that they report incorrectly, but that's a whole nother story. But yeah, so then there's the declaration. There's the declaration of a crisis. Then the next stage is the suspension of truth and suspension of the facts, and then come the sweeping policies. Now, when I say sweeping policies, I use that term for a reason, because the policies tend to be very vague, right? There's a lot of things in there that are undefined. There's a lot of things in there that you don't really know exactly what they mean. And by the way, that's intentional. It's intentional for this reason, because they are willing to accept the fact that they will never publicly acknowledge, but they're willing to accept the fact that they don't know what they're talking about. So what they're going to do is they're going to make this thing vague enough, and they're going to say, I want this. And then they take this, and they get it passed, and it gets signed by the governor, and then they hand it over to some department. They hand it over to some bureaucrat to then start with the definitions and the redefining, and start to then provide the details that go underneath. Now, the interesting thing about this is that these unelected, unaccountable individuals not only are doing the job of the legislature in terms of providing the nuts and the bolts and the details, but oftentimes they come to a point where they realize that what they've been asked to do by the legislature and the governor doesn't work. It don't fit. I can't make it happen. So what they do is they make stuff up. They decide, I'm going to now create a definition, or I'm going to redefine something that was already defined in statute, in order to fill the gap because the legislature didn't do their job. A great example, and with all due deference to our president, I love our president. Before I say this, I will say he has been the most pro-Second Amendment president we have had in my lifetime. So let me say that. But on his bump stock ban. Now, I don't own a bump stock. I don't want to own a bump stock. If I could afford a whole bunch of ammunition, maybe I would have wanted a bump stock, but like, okay, there's $100. But
we need ammo cheaper.
But here's my concern. What they did was they said, okay, we're going to redefine a machine gun. What a machine gun is in order to include a bump stock. Now, mind you, a law had already been passed. Machine guns had already been defined in statute. An unelected bureaucrat through regulations is not allowed to go and change through regulations a definition that's defined in statute. But that's exactly what they did. And my concern over it was this, once again, if we're going to allow the president, this administration to redefine, to violate the process in order to redefine an item that we don't care about, what's to keep the next president from doing the same exact thing to redefine an item that we do care about? Precedent means a lot. But he's not the only one. During the COVID-19, California DOJ, our Attorney General Javier Becerra, decided, well, you know what? We know we're supposed to do background checks in 10 days, but we're not going to bother. We're not going to bother to do that. Right? You take, for example, the current order to wear masks, or you will get a fine or a penalty. Now, I'm sorry, did I miss something? Did the legislature pass a law that approved that? No?
Well, you know, we're all in compliance here.
Senators know it's not a law.
Remind me to call the governor when I'm done. But that's what happens, and so then with that, once again, and it seems like it seems like minor inconveniences, right? But the problem, once again, is this. The problem is that you start. They never just come for your rights all at once. They nibble away at them. They nibble away at them. They nibble away at them until eventually they've taken so much that their attitude is, well, I might as well take the rest. That's what dealing with gun laws are like in the state of California. Now, California is close to the worst, but not the worst. There are states that are far worse. See New Jersey and Hawaii. But think about that, where you actually, for example, my belief that you know what a permit and a license is? It's where they take your rights and then they sell it back to you for a fee. They give you permission in order for you to be able to do that. Like in New Jersey, they have to actually get a permit before they can go buy a firearm. Now, when you go, there are people who've been waiting 2 years to get a permit. There are instances, more than one, in the state of New Jersey alone, where individuals have gone to get a permit because they have had a specific threat against their lives or against their persons, and they were stuck in the process. And in one case, I know for sure the person actually was killed by the person who they were seeking to protect themselves from. I mean, in some places, like in New York, getting a firearm permit is like what's considered probable cause is you probably have to be in the middle of an attempted murder at the time. Then they might actually approve your permit. to get a gun. Yeah. Right. That's not to carry, mind you. Let me remind you. That is not to carry a firearm. That is simply to get one.
What is stopping that from happening here in California? Are we basically?
Absolutely nothing. See, last year taught the California legislature that in particular when it comes to firearms, that Governor Gavin Newsom will sign anything. He will sign anything that they put before him that will infringe upon our fundamental rights. There is not a doubt in our mind that he would sign anything. Now, having said that, I will also say this. There are some, very few, But there are a handful of really reasonable, rational-minded Democrats on this issue that can be talked to and dissuaded from some of these really bad bills. Now, you may not see them vote against it in committee, but some of these bills you start to see die in Appropriations Committee, which is kind of a way in which they kill bills without really having to vote on them. I can tell you that those members are few and far in between. But I know that we have had success in killing some bills simply by focusing on and working with some of those members. But fundamentally, and then the one question they wanted us was okay, so, all right, so I've talked now about how they're the same, right? So how now do we fight to keep those rights? Well, the first thing that I will tell you is this. It's a lot easier to persuade a liberty-minded elected official, a constitutionally minded official, to do the constitutional liberty-minded thing than it is to get a totalitarian Marxist elected official to do a constitutional liberty-minded thing. Elections have consequences. Let me say it again. I know you've heard it before. Elections have consequences. We have to work to make sure that like-minded people are getting elected. Now, there's two ways in which we do that. Number one, you do like you're doing here. The idea of educating your membership on the Constitution, educating your membership on the issues, and educating your membership on who the candidates are and where they stand on those issues, so that people know who they're supposed to be voting for. But understanding that voting for them is like the D- of engagement. I mean, really, that's the D-. Your thing you have to ask yourself is, how am I working for them? What am I doing in order to help them to be able to advance and get elected? Right? What am I doing? Have I donated? Have I given of my time? Have I given of my talent? Have I given of my treasury? Right? If you can't say that you've given of one, well, at least one, well, then you're a cheerleader. And cheerleaders are nice, but cheerleaders don't win football games. I hope I didn't offend any cheerleaders here. But here's the thing, you've got to invest. Even if it's a little bit with a lot of people is a lot. So you have to, number one, invest. Number two, give of your talent. Right? Whatever you have that you can do. Sometimes that talent is just, you can pick up the phone and you can call somebody. You can walk precincts. You can knock on doors. Right? You can lick envelope. Whatever it is that they need you to do, everyone can do something. Right? Everyone needs to do something. Even if it's sharing a Facebook post. Right? It's that simple. Everybody needs to do something. All right? Talent, give you your time, talent, and treasure. So one of those things, you need to make sure that you're engaged in that. The other thing that you have to make sure that you are engaged in is recognizing your sphere of influence. All of us have a sphere of influence. We have people who listen to us. We listen to them too, but they are people who listen to us. We have to be willing to share our values. We also have to be willing to listen. Hear what their values are. Because if you've ever gone to buy a car, right? You go in, the salesman is always talking to you. It's amazing how many questions the salesman asks you. Oh, okay, well, how many kids you have? What do you do for a living? Do you drive a lot? Yada, yada, yada. What do you think that salesman is doing? He's
winning you over.
He's collecting data. He's looking for points. He's looking for places where he can sell you. There's a friend of mine who did sales and marketing training. And he said, if you want to sell what Judy buys, you have to see what Judy wants through Judy's eyes. I'll say that again. If you want to sell what Judy buys, you have to see what Judy wants through Judy's eyes. Meaning, you have to see what it is that she wants. What need are you fulfilling for Judy? And then you have to explain how the product that you are selling, the thing that you are trying to communicate to them, meets those needs. The fact that a car can go from 0 to 60. Am I running over time?
No, you're good.
Okay, good, okay. The fact that a car... The fact that a car can go from 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds is different to different people. To a 16-year-old kid, it might mean that he can drag race his friends. To a mother in a minivan, it might mean she can get out of the way when she sees these kids come running up the street. It's different. The Republican Party is very good at talking about features, liberty, free enterprise, religious freedom, right? Entrepreneurship. What we are horrible at is benefits. What does that mean to you? What does that mean to the young 19-year-old black male in downtown Stockton? What does it mean to the soccer mom in Lodi? What does it mean to the pastor, right? What does it mean to the business owner? See, we kind of just throw this thing out there and we think that everybody thinks like we think, that everybody sees things the way that we do. But everybody doesn't. And what's interesting about this country is the more we grow, the more diverse we become, the more we realize we don't all see things the same. But if I really want to influence you, if I really want you to understand why what I believe, why the values that I believe in work, then I need to understand what you're looking for. Because if I tell you what I'm looking for, that may not be the same. We may click. We may not. But I don't know. So we have to take the time to listen. When I worked for Senator Tim Leslie, he was in the assembly, and what I always appreciated about him was most of the meetings that we went to, he didn't talk. He listened. And I knew he listened because when we went back and met after the meetings, I had a laundry list of stuff that I needed to either research, do, or calls that I needed to make based on what he heard. Because the next time he met with those individuals or talked to them on the phone or the next time they would see, he wanted them to know that they were heard. And that is probably the number one thing that voters want. That's why they voted for Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a master marketer. Donald Trump listened, and then he told the people what they wanted. And now he's doing, to the degree that the Democrats will let him, he's doing what they wanted, which is why those people who supported him support him even more. But we have got to we've got to recognize that that's what we need to do. We need to be better listeners. We need to come to understand how our values impact people who may or may not think like us, who may or may not look like us, whose American experience may or may not be the same as ours. But they're here for a reason, right? If they immigrated here, they immigrated here for a reason. If they live here, they still live here for a reason. So there's something that they see. There's something in the American dream that's keeping them, and all we need to do is help them to see how the values, and by the way, and I always talk about Republican values, but I believe that Republican values are American values.
Yeah.
I happen to wholeheartedly believe that. I believe that they are the values upon which this nation was founded that have made this nation great. And as we have strayed from those values, we have strayed from our greatness. Doesn't mean that we're not great. It just means I believe we were heading in the wrong direction. We need to keep heading in that right direction. And we start heading in that right direction, once again, by understanding those values, and once again, understanding how those values impact others. And I believe that's the same thing with the Second Amendment. One of the interesting things with COVID-19 was that when it came out, everybody wanted to buy a gun. I had some of my most liberal friends, most anti-gun friends asking me, well, how do I get a firearm? And then they go to the gun store and they find out that, well, wait, what do you mean I have to take a test? What do you mean I have to wait 10 days before I can get my gun? Well, what do you mean I can't have that one, that's not on the not unsafe handgun roster? All of a sudden, they're learning about the infringements. See, they're learning that the Second Amendment does mean something to them. The reason why a lot of people in the past didn't care or supported the idea of, what should we say, common sense gun laws. I don't use the term common sense. It's more like common nonsense. All right? It's definitely more like, because common sense is not that common, but it's more like common nonsense. But was because most of them didn't understand how it infringed, and they didn't really care, because guess what? That's a right they chose not to exercise. But as people decided they wanted to exercise those rights, now we have an opportunity, and they were denied that, or they was delayed. Now all of a sudden they're starting to realize, wow, okay, maybe I need to do something. So once again, we have an unprecedented opportunity with the lockdown, with all of these riots that have been going on. And yes, I'm fully saying take advantage as it's a crisis. What's that saying? Never let a good crisis go to waste. They're not. They are not letting this crisis go to waste. But see, here's the thing. Their overreach is our opportunity. Their overreach is our opportunity to show them the difference between tyranny and freedom, right? Between communism or socialism and capitalism, free enterprise, right? To help them to understand what it means to live in a country that is free. Because they see, and by the way, free with law and order. Because they see what happens. They see what happens when you let them get a little too free. You wind up with CHOP. Which, by the way, just to give you the irony, you guys do realize that they put up a border wall. Instituted a curfew. They had IDs. They checked IDs to make sure when you live. As they talked about putting together the idea of, well, how are we going to decide what we're going to do in here? They made people show their IDs before they could vote. I mean.
And they got arms on the border.
And they have arms on the border, exactly.
And segregation.
Right. And segregation.
Also CNN.
What?
Also CNN.
Oh yeah. And they have CNN. Excuse me. But so anyway, their overreach is our opportunity, and I think that it's important that that we start off by listening with an empathetic ear. I'll use this as an example, and I'll kind of close on this particular point. One of the challenges we've gotten to, and really kind of social media has brought us to this point where we spend a lot of time arguing, right? I know I do. I spend a lot of time arguing with people on social media. They're trying to prove their point, I'm trying to prove my point, right? And the problem is this, and Dennis Prager, who is by far my favorite radio talk show host, he has this saying, he's like, I don't try to seek agreement, I try to seek understanding. Part of what we need to do is we need to be willing to stop and listen and get understanding. Because when we think about things like symbols, a lot of people don't realize Black Lives Matter is several different things. There's Black Lives Matter, the saying or the slogan, Black Lives Matter, and I think all of us support that and believe that because we believe that all lives matter, right? There's Black Lives Matter, the movement, which is about a bunch of different things. Some things I think we can get behind, some things absolutely positively not. Then there's BLM, the 501c3 Marxist, socialist, anti-Christian, anti-family, LGBTQ, alphabet letter organization. That not only, and I will be I'll just be very, very frank with you. Number one, not only does not like men, but does not like black men very well either. They have an agenda that is far beyond anything that is about helping the black community or helping, in particular, black men, any man, let alone black men. So you have to understand that when people are talking about what is going on and what they're feeling, sometimes it's a matter of let's listen to what they have to say and get an understanding. I don't have to agree with their perception, but I can at least understand it. Because if I understand it, then I can talk about how what I believe can help affect it. Just like I look at all these I look at all the monuments and things that they're tearing down. And the interesting thing is that people who I know who believe or who like the Confederate flag, most of them, it has nothing to do with the Civil War. It has nothing to do with the South. It literally just means to them Southern pride, right? It's nothing angry. It's nothing malicious. It's nothing racist, right? But the problem is that others perceive it that way. And if you take time to stop and say, okay, let me listen, okay, what does this mean to you? Like when Drew Brees talked about when he was asked, well, would you support, how would you feel if NFL players knelt during the national anthem? He talked about why he couldn't support it, and he shared that, look, this is what I see. This is what I see when I'm experiencing the national anthem. This is what it means to me. Well, why can't we just take that and say, okay, I get that. I may or may not agree with it. I happen to agree with it. I may or may not agree with it, but at least we develop that understanding. I can guarantee you right now, the left is not interested in developing an understanding. But if we can be willing to develop that understanding and then show how the values that we believe in can help affect the change that they are seeking, that's how you win hearts and minds. That's how we win people over. That's how we start to go from being a minority party in the state of California to becoming a majority party in the state of California again, making California red again. Thank you.